My name is Wasil Fashina, and I'm the president of the Chicago chapter of National Forum for Black Public Administrators. I welcome all attendees to this Reform That Matter virtual public policy forum. This is organized by our Public Policy Committee, co-chaired by Lanetta, Ames Turner, and Mr. Derek Brownlee. And just a little bit about the National Forum for Black Public Administrators. We are an advocate for the advancement of African-American public administrators. And all we're asking for is to be given opportunity to prove ourselves. So we will be a pressure group. We're acting as a pressure group to support all our African-American public administrators and for them to have equal opportunity in public and private sectors. And I also want to thank the entire Public Policy Committee members for their hard work and dedication to make this forum a success. And also our key sponsors are Unison Consulting, the William Everett Group, CKL, AdTech. And thank you very much for supporting this forum. And I am honored and privileged to introduce a Black history icon, the first African-American Lieutenant Governor in the state of Illinois, Ms. the Honorable Juliana Stratton. Honorable Stratton.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. And thank you for that introduction, Wasu. So good to see you. And thank you to the incredible leaders participating tonight from the National Forum for Black Public Administrators, Chicago chapter, and especially the Public Policy Committee who planned this fantastic event. And certainly I would also like to thank you, President Preclinkle, for the invitation and for your continued leadership and advocacy around bringing an equity lens to the narrative about criminal justice. This includes supporting programs like this, which brings together stakeholders to celebrate our advancements and to discuss the work that remains to be done in all of our communities. And I want to congratulate my friends and former colleagues in the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus for drafting, leading, and rallying the Illinois General Assembly to pass one of the most monumental criminal justice reform packages that our state has ever seen. It is historic, it's comprehensive, it's bold, and it is long overdue. And our communities and the entire country, quite frankly, are now watching and realizing what is possible. You know, it's been said before, and I will say it again. We are facing two pandemics, COVID-19 and systemic racism. And both have made it abundantly clear that we must continue to ramp up efforts to change the landscape of every inequitable system with the urgency of now. As you well know, transforming our justice system goes beyond policing jails and prisons. Transforming the justice system requires a holistic approach to combat the systemic racism that continues to create far too many barriers as we seek to expand opportunities and access in Black communities in housing, healthcare, education, economic development, entrepreneurship, transportation, and food systems. Why? Because safe and healthy communities with residents having their needs met is the very best way to keep people out of the justice system in the first place. And for those who find themselves in the system, coming home to healthy communities will help keep them from cycling in and out of that system. The work that we all do together must be done through a lens of equity and providing economic opportunities so that every person in every community in Illinois has a fighting chance to live without entanglement in the justice system. Thank you to the advocates and community leaders who have steadfastly fought for these changes for many years. Thank you again to the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus for courageously pushing the envelope to root out systemic racism. And happy Black History Month to all of you. Because as I close, there's one thing that I know to be true as we celebrate Black History Month, that one of the very best ways to celebrate Black history is to work to improve Black futures. And Governor Pritzker and I certainly look forward to continuing our partnership and working with every level of government to do just that. Thank you again, and I'm going to turn it back over, I believe, to Lynetta Haynes-Turner.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Stratton. I am Lynetta Haynes-Turner, co-chair of the Public Policy Committee. Before I introduce our next distinguished guest, I would like to give special thanks and recognition to the members of the Public Policy Committee who were instrumental in planning this event. Thank you to my co-chair, Derek Brownlee, and co-moderator, Lakeisha Buckner-Smith, who you will hear from later today. Secretary Ashley Williams, and committee members Ellen Turner, Dorothy Brown, Daya Goree, Kenneth Jilks, Roderick Height, and Stacy Young. We have an exciting panel discussion ahead of us this evening. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our second special guest, Cook County Board President and Chair of the Democratic Party, Toni Preckwinkle. Cook County Board President Toni Preckwinkle is not just my boss, but a staunch advocate for good government. Over the course of her more than 30 years in public service, she has worked to lift up our communities, transform the Cook County criminal justice system, and mentor the next generation of young leaders, building a pipeline with organizations like the National Forum for Black Public Administrators. Please welcome the Honorable Cook County Board President, Toni Preckwinkle.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank the Chicago chapter of the National Forum for Black Administrators for the opportunity to participate in tonight's forum. I'm especially grateful to be among some of my colleagues at the state, county, and city level, policy leaders and community stakeholders who are passionate and committed to reforming the systems that improve the well-being and quality of life for our residents. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Lynetta's good work on behalf of the people of Cook County and in this organization. I have to give a special acknowledgement to members of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus for having the courage and the tenacity to successfully pass comprehensive legislation that addresses racist policies that have disproportionately impacted our Black and brown people and how they're treated in this county and this country when it comes to education, economic opportunities, and interaction with the police and the criminal justice system. I want you to know that the good work that the Illinois Black Caucus did is historic, and they all deserve our thanks and appreciation. And while we celebrate the Black Caucus's historic moment, it's important that we recognize that there's still work to be done, particularly in the areas of policing and criminal justice reform. As you're probably aware, the Black Caucus established 4 pillars, and while important legislation was passed in the areas of education, economic development and opportunities, and criminal justice reform, the 4th pillar around healthcare did not secure passage in the House and in the Senate. And so I hope that we'll be working and supporting the Black Caucus in its effort to get that legislation passed as well. The racist systems of Jim Crow, we all know, did not go away with the end of the Civil War or the end of Reconstruction or the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s, but simply transformed into mass incarceration and policing systems that we have today. All levels of government, including Cook County, must continue building on the foundation recently laid by our Black Caucus in Springfield. We too need to take bold and necessary steps in order to root out systemic racism and create a more equitable and effective criminal justice system. Despite what detractors may want you to believe, ending cash bail, requiring licensing and certification of our police officers, and protecting detainees' rights while in custody will not lead to more violence. At the county level, I've always believed that safely decreasing the pretrial population held in the jail is just the right and equitable thing to do. Thanks to local bond reforms implemented in 2017 by Chief Judge Tim Evans, and now with the Pretrial Fairness Act, if signed into law, individuals accused of crimes which are nonviolent, not considered dangerous, people who are not considered dangerous and who don't pose a flight risk, will be allowed to keep their jobs, continue going to school, and take care of their families while awaiting trial. This is a privilege that the wealthy have always had. When I took office in 2010, the jail population was a little over 11,000. It's now about half that. I'm hopeful that our population will be reduced even further once this legislation goes into effect in 2023. Our reforms to help make the justice system fairer go hand in hand with efforts to improve the safety and resilience of our communities. From access to health care, affordable housing, quality education, and economic opportunity, this omnibus bill presents a path forward as we take a holistic approach and equitably invest in what we know works now and for generations to come. Again, I thank you for inviting me to participate, and I look forward to a robust and productive discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, President Preclinkle. Another Black history icon, the first African-American woman elected county board president. Thank you, a very strong advocate of criminal justice reform. Thank you for all you do, Madam President. Now I will introduce our co-chair, Derek Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's an honor and a privilege to be here this evening. Thank everyone and all of our speakers that have joined us this evening. It is my privilege and honor to introduce one of our co-moderators who I've grown to love and appreciate very deeply over the last 6 months, Lakeisha Buckner-Smith. Lakeisha is an active member of NFBPA, where she actually serves on 3 committees, including public policy, career services, and vice chair of emerging leaders. Lakeisha is a graduate of Chicago State University, a career services professional at South Suburban College, and a public servant who believes our placement in a globalized world is key to our perspective. No culture is perfect, and we can all learn from one another. Lakeisha has worked to eliminate gender bias and increase sustainability through sound and practical policies in the public sector for more than 15 years. I will now turn it over to Lakeisha Smith, co-moderator for this forum this evening.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again. Thank you, Derek, for that wonderful introduction. I would like to introduce my esteemed co-moderator, Alderman Jason Irvin, who will introduce our awesome panel shortly. Jason was appointed Alderman of Chicago's 28th Ward in 2011 by then Mayor Richard M. Daley, and elected to a full term by the people of the 28th Ward in February of 2011. Alderman Irvin received his bachelor's degree in accounting at Southern Illinois University and a master's in public administration from Governor State University. Alderman Irvin is dedicated to public service and empowering communities through social change and political organizing, and demonstrating his commitment each and every day as chair of the Automatic Black Caucus. Jason has also been an active member of NFBPA Chicago chapter in the past. Now I would like to tell you a little bit about the Illinois Black Caucus. The caucus originated in a study group formed by Hale Washington, Lewis H. Caldwell, Otis Collins, and Calvin Smith in 1966. It was formally established in 1968. The primary mission of ILBC is to ensure that the interests of African American citizens are given equitable representation in the General Assembly, and that legislative action is directed to address those interests. For 47 years, the Illinois Black Caucus has represented the interests of Illinois citizens. Through the efforts of caucus, tremendous strides have been made in the areas of housing, health, welfare, education, employment, and minority business enterprise. Since the first presence of African Americans in the House of Representatives in 1876, more than 157 African American legislators have been elected to serve in both the House and the Senate. Today, there are 31 members of the Black Caucus, 10 Black senators, and 21 representatives make up the Illinois Black Caucus. Alderman Irving, would you please introduce our esteemed panelists?
Good evening and welcome. Again, thank you all for having us here on this momentous occasion. I would like to introduce all of our panelists that will be joining us on today's panel, beginning with, I will start with the West Sider out of the bunch, State Representative Camille Lilly from the 78th District. Welcome, Representative Lilly.
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman Irvin. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Mariana, who is not only a West Side resident, she's also resident of one of the greatest wards in the city, the 28th Ward on the west side of Chicago, Dr. Enya.
Good evening, Chairman. It is great to be here. Thank you so much.
Next, we'd like to introduce a young man whom I met actually in a campaign here, Wales, on the west side of Chicago, when he was helping us with Alderman Michael Scott in the 24th Ward, and newest member of the group here, Senator Robert Peters.
What's up, Chairman? I know west side's best side, but, you know, south side's where it's at. So, you know what I mean?
Very well, sir. And then my two south side brethren, we will bring them on. First, Representative Justin Slaughter from the 27th District, it is, sir?
27th
District are representing parts of the far south side of the city, small portion of the suburbs. Representative Slaughter.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Great to see you. Great to see everyone. We are just so glad to be here, honored to be here, and you know, ready to just keep our sleeves rolled up to push forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Slaughter. And finally, our chairman of the House Illinois Black Legislative Caucus, probably whose house is closest to mine, even though he's a South Sider, Representative Cam Buckner.
Thank you, Chairman Irvin. Great to be with you tonight, and it's a pleasure to be with all the folks who have gathered here. So looking forward to the conversation.
Okay. All right. We are going to move forward in the conversation. We'll turn you back over to my co-moderator, Ms. Lakeisha Buckner-Smith, and we'll move further in the program.
Thank you, Alderman. So before we move forward with the conversation, we do want to discuss that this is Black History Month, and Illinois has a new Speaker of the House for the first time in 30 years. Emmanuel Chris Welch represents the 7th District, and he was elected in the 101st General Assembly. As we know, there were 4 pillars that were the focus of the 101st General Assembly, and we're going to get into those pillars one by one. Representative Cam Buckner, good evening.
Good evening.
So we want to talk about education and workforce development. While education shouldn't be seen as a left or right issue, it is often seen as an experience as such. Minority children have long suffered disproportionately in available resources and targeted strategies that will improve outcomes. Being intentional and clear about the scale of the task and bringing more equity to schools across the city and the state, education is the purest form of how children prepare and become empowered. But it has also, in cases, created conditions that diminish opportunity and freedom for everyone. Can you speak to us about the new legislation and how it will help with equity?
Absolutely. So what the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus set out to do through the educational pillar that was part of our Black Caucus agenda that was passed earlier in January, is that we really set out to build an educational system that works for everyone. And we know to do that, we need reforms that target the inequities that are in the system. For generations, children in underserved Black and Latino communities have been left behind when it comes to education and forced to succeed with a lack of resources that would frankly be unimaginable for our white counterparts. We've seen studies after studies that talk about how school districts with the greatest number of students living in poverty have received substantially fewer state and local dollars than their affluent counterparts, up to 20% less in some cases. We also know that a lack of equal access to education perpetuates inequality practically from the moment a child is born, right? And so the work we've done is really focused around that. I've got the pleasure of representing a very diverse district, and we have places like Streeterville, but I also represent places like Washington Park. And the life expectancy in Streeterville is about 89 years old. The life expectancy in Washington Park is about 61 years old. We're talking about almost 30-year gap in life expectancy. So why is that important in this conversation? Is because we know that the education gap turns into the quality of life gap, which turns into the life expectancy gap. So we're really focused on running to the fire on this and making sure that we address things that have been, there have been issues in our community for a very long time.
Thank you so much for that high level conversation piece. So I do want to ask a few follow-up questions just in general. When legislators were looking at how to craft the best possible bill, were you looking at education as a national and culture issue, or were you looking at it from a policy bucket standpoint?
I think we looked at it as both, right? Because it is a cultural issue, but prescribing the right policy prescriptions for it, takes it requires a holistic approach. We're not just talking about pedagogy, right, and theory. We're also talking about funding, right, and making sure that the dollars that are required to change the system are actually there, right? I think as a state we have we have an obligation to not just fully fund our schools, but to make sure that schools who have been left in school districts and communities who have been left in the shadows for a very long time are able to to benefit from the dollars that are in the state's coffers. And so it really was a holistic approach, and I think we were really circumspect in doing this and making sure that we looked at this as a totality of circumstances type of situation.
All right, if we can move on to workforce development. Unemployment for Black young men is double the national rate in the state of Illinois. How does placing a renewed focus on vocational skills help lower the unemployment gap for Black young men?
Yeah, and so this is a huge piece of this bill. We know that there, as you said, there are young Black men in all of our communities who are either underemployed or unemployed, or some folks might even say unemployable, right? We cannot create wealth, we cannot create equity, we cannot create a better quality of life in our neighborhoods and our communities if we don't address that issue head on. We've seen that vocational programs, we've seen that those type of things have been able to help pull our people out of poverty, right? And so this is really a clarion call to all of the external stakeholders. And then I say external stakeholders because I'm talking about folks like the trade unions, talking about folks who for a very long time have done not enough work to embrace young Black men and women who are looking for employment. So we really look at this employment piece as the way to gain our communities back, the way to really embrace the things that we've talked about in this entire Black Caucus agenda. And we know that a job is more than a paycheck, right? A job is about dignity and creating a pathway to career, to having a career and pathway to sustainable wealth and families who feel stable. It's important. We talk a lot about generational wealth, but generational poverty is an issue as well. And so what we've done through this legislation is try to address that.
Thank you so much. As a graduate of Chicago Vocational High School, I definitely agree with the vocational piece of the legislation. Thank you so much, Representative Buckner. We'll be back to talk to you a little later. I'm going to hand it back over to my co-moderator for the next pillar.
Thank you, Lakeisha. Again, this is a great beginning of a conversation. One thing that we talk about, the Criminal Justice Reform, Violence Reduction, and Police Accountability Act, one of the most publicized and talked about pieces of HB 3653 is the Pretrial Fairness Act, which was a bill that Senator Peters introduced which makes sweeping changes to the Illinois pretrial justice system and ends the use of monetary bonds. The current system keeps people detained due to an inability to pay versus whether or not they're going to come. So Senator Peters and also Representative Slaughter, if you guys would mind expounding on this, because this is actually some people looked at it as a double-edged sword, but I want to hear your perspective on what we can do, what we will do with this particular piece of legislation.
I'll let Representative Slaughter kick it off.
Will do. Good evening again. Just wanted to thank the National Forum for Black Public Administrators once again, just for your dedication and commitment to the Black community. A long history here of the Black Caucus trying to address pretrial fairness. Senator Sims, then State Representative Sims, pushing his bill forward, I believe, in 2016, 2017, in 2019, myself introducing and pushing an iteration of the Pretrial Fairness Act, and then our brother, Senator Peters, just late last year, introducing the latest iteration that was codified into law of the Pretrial Fairness Act. Look, I mean, what we're doing here is moving from a system where we were leaning on one's financial ability or inability to post bond to more of one that is going to actually look at if the individual is a threat to society or if the individual is a flight risk. And so what that means is we'll be looking at utilizing more of a verified risk assessment tool and pushing forward with a system that is actually going to more so look comprehensively at the nature of the offense of the individual and holistic approach to looking at the situation and the circumstance around the incident. And really what we wanted to do here, and Senator Peters, you should jump in, is look at two things. One, on the fairness side, you hear this a lot from the advocates' perspective, but we really believe that this was criminalizing the poor, criminalizing poverty. You know, we exist in a world now where Kyle Rittenhouse can be bonded out before his trial because he has the financial means. But our Black brothers and sisters that are homeless are being detained because they stole some food trying to feed their family. And so we really wanted to address the fairness aspect of it. But on the other side, on the law and order conservative perspective, and this is where we're a little miffed why they're so up in arms about this, but we also think that this enhances public safety. Right now, if you're a dangerous, violent individual, you can be released back out into the community if you have the financial means to post bond. So what this is going to do is, again, look at this more comprehensively and more holistically. So we were proud to do this. Senator Peters, why don't you jump in, maybe talk about the effective date on this being bumped out and some of these nuances that are in the bill that are worth educating the public about.
Yeah, I'll be relatively quick. I think, there's a 2-year implementation period. One of the reasons we did that is because we saw in New Jersey having that 2-year implementation period means that you can get implementation right. The other part about this, as Rep. Slaughter has said, is when we think about our justice system, we have a tiered sense of safety. So simply put, if you're rich and you're white, you have one tier of safety. If you're Black, you have another tier. If you're poor and you're poor and Black, you have another tier. If you're a poor Black and a woman, you have an even lower tier of safety. And what we believe is with the Pretrial Fairness Act, we get rid of tiers of safety and we say everyone deserves safety and justice for all. And on top of that, so with the 2-year implementation period, we've been hearing all these talking points. This is going to be dangerous when it comes to domestic violence and all that stuff. Well, what makes this unique is it might be the first form of criminal justice policy that had support from domestic violence and sexual assault advocates who were supporting this. And so, and I quote literally the Illinois Coalition Against Domestic Violence when they say this is criminal justice reform that puts survivor safety first. So it is a unique piece of legislation. It's one that myself, Senator Sims, Representative Slaughter, and a whole bunch of organizers and advocates have been working on for over half a decade. It's a historic piece of legislation, and it starts moving us towards, safety and justice for everybody and not just a few.
So with that, are there any felony charges that you would not be eligible for no cash bond provision?
I'll jump in. So there, essentially, and President Preclinkle had also mentioned this, really wanting to address and look at lower level nonviolent offenses. Chairman Irvin, these are folks that come through your doors, your ward office every day, locked up for stealing a candy bar, right? To the essence of the question, what we're looking at are some higher level felonies that are eligible for detention, first degree murder, kidnapping, residential burglary, sex exploitation of a child. These are all what you would consider forcible felonies. You can be released pre-trial. However, these higher level felonies are ones that are certainly eligible for detention. And again, at the end of the day, we want this to be about addressing the situation comprehensively and not leaning so much on did the individual have the ability to financially post bond.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a step in the right direction. And actually, switching gears a little bit, related to the Police Accountability and Reform Act, which is also a sweeping part of the legislation that's done. And if the governor signs it, will require police officers from across the state to be licensed and outfitted with body cameras and other changes. Can you discuss how data related to police misconduct will be transparent, tracked, and made available to the public, and also some of the bans that were placed in this versus the chokeholds and other things that police cannot do going forward, if you would expound on that for us.
Yeah, I mean, look, we did a lot with the bill, especially in regards to transparency. We wanted to strengthen requirements that enhance transparency for police officers. So yes, there is a mandate and requirement for body cams, a statewide mandate for body cams. That'll begin in 2022 and have a rolling compliance schedule that will culminate in 2025. Also, we wanted to strengthen the requirements for the reporting, collecting, and retention of records and data. So that was really big for this bill. And really around that, what we were looking at was, expanding the reporting around the use of force, establishing data repository, and then also looking at how we modify policies pertaining to police officer integrity. So whistleblower protections, a lot of provisions there that strengthen those protections for officers. And so these were all things that we wanted to do. We looked at the licensing part scheme with police officers, and we'll be expanding the misconduct police officer database, right? There'll be more notifications to municipalities when an officer, resigns under an investigation, or when there are those red flags that came up within the disciplinary process for a particular officer. Those things will now be logged in the state misconduct database. And so doing a lot with looking at record keeping, prohibiting the destruction of records. Of course, Leader Mary Flowers she's been at that one for 36 years now. We got those provisions in the bill. And so did a lot around transparency.
Very good. Sounds like you all tried to get as much as you could in this particular bill. Also, can you talk about the crime victims compensation? A lot of times we find individuals who've been wronged and have lost their lives, family members and the like, and there's always been talk about compensation for these victims. Can you talk about what you all have done to expand those provisions in this bill?
Sure. I mean, it was something under our violence reduction component that we really wanted to do. But working with also the Attorney General Raul's office, wanted to streamline the claims process and then expand the pool of victims eligible for counseling. This is a holistic approach. It's not just maybe the mother or the father. It can also be the cousin. It could also be a friend. Our families and how the Black community works is really in a nuanced way. A lot of us have expanded large families and are impacted by the violence and the trauma of our community. So we expanded, the victim eligibility for that. We also increased the statute of limitations on a lot of these situations. And then I know one other thing we did was remove the cap on the emergency funds for funerals and relocations, and increase the actual compensation cap. I think it was at 25,000, and now we increased it to 45,000.
Okay, sounds great. We just need somebody to put their pen to this, and we can make it reality for all of us. Thank you, Representative Slaughter and Senator Peters, for your information on this pillar. I'm going to turn you back over to my co-moderator, Lakeisha Buckner, and we'll move further in the program.
Well, this is a great discussion so far. I want to acknowledge Commissioner Dennis Deere, who has joined us, and Senator Maddie Hunter, who has also joined us. So we have gotten through the first two pillars, and I want to invite Dr. Inya in now to speak about how she sees these new measures being of direct assistance to the community. Dr. Inya?
Sure. Thank you so much for this opportunity and for this panel. And I also definitely want to thank the representatives, Senator Peters, Representative Slaughter, Senator Sims. There were so many who really came out this session in a very exciting way. I can say from a community perspective, a lot of what happened in this session has been decades in the making. And so we're seeing a level of boldness and I dare say unapologetic moves in the right direction that's very encouraging, especially from the perspective of those of us who are organizers, grassroots organizations, and people who've just been looking for some tangible changes to happen. So it's exciting to have the Legislative Black Caucus really in line with a lot of what has been called for from the community side. And so just speaking to Representative Buckner spoke about some of the changes in the education system. And I just wanted to reiterate the fact that these changes are absolutely critical. So a lot of what we've heard have had to deal with curriculum, especially when we're looking at the curriculum that Black students have an opportunity to have beyond Black history, which is incredibly important, but also making sure that our students are prepared not just to compete with their peers in Illinois, but we have a global economy. And so some of the provisions that Senator Lightfoot has really addressed in the legislation on the education side relate to making sure that our technical and computer skills are up to par so that our children can compete globally. It's also making sure that we have access to multiple language programs, because again, when we want our children to graduate and to be able to get jobs in the economy. And so those provisions that she's pushed have been incredibly important. On the vocational education piece, that's also so critical because we know that yes, college is an option, but it's not the only option. And in fact, what we found is that there are many jobs in the economy and they don't require necessarily a four-year degree, but they do require skills. And so we want to make sure that our children are getting access to those skills in elementary school, in middle school, and high school, and community colleges, so that they can be prepared for the jobs that are available. And these are well-paying family and individual sustaining jobs. So those are some critical things that are happening on education. I also want to say, this issue of the teacher pipeline, broadening the teacher pipeline and removing barriers, particularly for Black teachers, and especially for Black men who are in the teaching profession. It is absolutely important that they have, that we increase the pipeline of our teachers, because we're not seeing them in the classroom. And that's a frank conversation that in the Black community has been had over and over again. So it's good to see some of those moves being made in this legislation. So kudos to the representatives for that. On the criminal justice side, it was really a joy to see. And I was participated and witnessed some of the long subject matter hearings. I know Representative Slaughter was a part of and kind of stewarding. I know Senator Peters was in the trenches, and we started talking last year about the provisions, and to see them really taking a stand on this criminal justice legislation that is historic. They talked about pretrial fairness, which is huge, ending cash bail, which it does criminalize the poor. People talk about they're in fear, like public safety is jeopardized, but there's no reason to have an unjust system because Black people will always be the ones who suffer from that. And so to make these kinds of moves to remove those injustices is huge. One aspect that I think doesn't get as much attention, but is considerably important, is prison gerrymandering. There are towns across the state whose economies are predicated on locking up Black people. And those Black people in those towns they're not even counted as residents from the neighborhoods in which they're from. And there are implications, there are financial implications that benefit the towns, but are to the detriment of the communities from where those individuals are from. And so ending prison gerrymandering and making it so that you don't have economies that are built around locking up Black folks, that's a huge step. And I think Illinois might be only one of 10 states in the country to have made that move. So it's one of the provisions in this criminal justice legislation that is so crucial. And some of the other components of it are really about moving things in the right direction and actually investing in our communities and divesting from the carceral state. So we're saying it's not all about how much money we can put into policing. It's about how do we make the system more just and actually invest in our communities to build strong communities, because that's the best way to get to violence reduction. And so when I came on board, I know the Movement for Black Lives has been pushing this national legislation called the Breathe Act. I know the Illinois legislators were uniquely open to really groundbreaking legislation and worked hard. And so the coalition that was pulled together in Illinois, the grassroots organizations that supported them, it really brought together so many different organizations that each had a piece of this legislation and finally putting it all into one. And I think that's a testament to the nature of this legislative caucus. And it gives us hope that this is sort of the beginning, that there will be additional things that happen. And those of us who work in community, those of us who represent grassroots organizations, are definitely standing in support of what the legislators have done.
Dr. Inya, my goodness, that was a dynamic response to address some things that we have been plagued with, such as the school to prison pipeline. Thank you so much for how eloquently you placed your thoughts.
Thank you.
We're going to move to Senator Robert Peters, and we're going to talk about, on a high level, the economic access, equity, and opportunity pillar, and how it is all connected to the criminal justice piece.
I think the main thing is, I think we talk about public safety all the time. We almost always tie it to the idea of public safety is simply about policing, jails, and prisons, but that's not the truth. What we know is, if you look at a community that has investment, that is doing economically well, it is also a safe community, because public safety is actually much larger than that. And I think it's important for us to expand on that. And I think when we look at the economic opportunity pillar, what we're looking at is the idea that corporations, show and are, required to demonstrate their commitment to and compliance with equal pay laws, increasing opportunities for minority-owned businesses to receive state contracts, right? So you have to think about the idea of state money, state funding, using that apparatus to help move capital and money to people who need it the most, particularly disinvested communities. Capping payday loan interest rates, which some are 300% plus down to 36%. And we know that when it comes to payday loan lending, it is predatory to the point where it is being predatory on Black and Latinx communities, extending support for banks and financial institutions in historically underserved communities so that they make sure that they invest in minority-owned businesses, so Black and Latinx-owned businesses, which in turn create jobs in local communities. And I think the part to me that sort of sticks out here is, and this is like big in my head, 2020 was a particularly difficult crisis. It was a crisis in terms of a pandemic. It was a crisis in terms of economics. It was a crisis in terms of systemic racism. The key part about this, though, is that what led to 2020 was crises for quite some time. And people have been feeling this sense of crisis. So post the Great Recession, it wiped out 54% of Black wealth, right? The foreclosure crisis was built on our backs. Small businesses in our communities are often the ones who are closing within a year or two. It's hard enough to get money. It's hard enough for us to be open. Folks who do work aren't getting paid what they need to get paid, so they don't have the economic power that they need. And so when we think about safety, and you talk about all that, which has nothing to necessarily do with the blue lights that might roam your streets or the closed circuit television that might watch your corner, what that has to do is the fact that if people don't have money and they don't have housing and they don't have a job and they don't have their own businesses and they don't have the investment, they're not going to be in a safe environment. It's going to push them to the brink. And what we know in our communities is that when things get tough in this country, in this state, in this city, it is us who have to pay for it. And I think what makes this pillar so influential and so important, particularly the payday loan piece. I can't, Senator Jackie Collins really led on that, and I really need to lift her up on this. And Senator Chris Belt carried this pillar, but particularly the payday loan piece, because when things get tough for us, when things hurt, and when we're pushed to the brink, someone who's predatory says, I'm here to help, and then stacks on 300% interest rates. It creates a cycle of pain and poverty. So I think this was, overall, the Black Caucus agenda is historic. And I think one of the ways that it was historic is the fact that we're functionally moving the conversation about what it means for us to have safe and invested communities in the 21st century in real material ways. And I think it's something that's beautiful, and it's something I'm proud to be part of, and I'm really honored to serve with such an amazing group of people. And let me add before, it's a problem. I was born deaf with a speech impediment. You give me this mic, I'm gonna just keep talking and talking and talking, but I'm gonna stop soon. Let me add, we're also growing. I think it was said earlier that we had 10 members in the Senate Black Caucus, and we're now at 12, and to the point where we're growing in the north. We have a Black Caucus member on the north side of Chicago. In the Senate, we have a Black Caucus member who replaced Senator Andy Menard in Central Illinois. And I think what makes this agenda particularly great is the fact that to be Black is actually beautiful and diverse, that we aren't a monolith. We are actually a beautiful, diverse group of people who know what we need in our community. And we need the space and the investment to do that and to be able to thrive. So, yep.
My goodness. Thank you so much, Senator Peters. I'm going to hand things back over to my co-moderator because we want to respect everyone's time, and we thank everyone for being so patient with us tonight. And so, co-moderator, if you want to take it from here.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next pillar was in relation to healthcare and human services. Representative Camille Lilly has been a leader on healthcare issues throughout not only her tenure in the General Assembly, but prior to going to the General Assembly. While that particular pillar did not pass all the way, could you enlighten us on what our moves are for the 102nd General Assembly to bring that to fruition, Rep. Lilly?
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, moderator, for just really bringing us to the forefront of your guests. The National Forum for Public Administrators, you have a real strong comeback to bring forth the information that is going to keep our public on point. I want to just state, together we will make sure our communities and the quality of life for all individuals here in Illinois is sound and just. And as I speak to the Health and Human Service pillar, we do nothing alone here in the General Assembly in Illinois. Our co-chair of the health pillar is Leader Hunter, Maddie Hunter, who just really took off with just making sure that we were staying focused and on point to make sure we have quality of life for all Illinoisans. With that being said, we started off this pillar with health is a right. Constitutionally, it is a right. And we have sidestepped this for far too long. Individuals must have access to the basic human essentials of life that gives them the ability to be successful. And as we do that, making sure people have housing, making people have food, jobs, education, and access to healthcare, you will have quality of life in our America. With that, we did a lot of work to bring our fourth pillar to bear. We ran out of time to pass it. However, I like to say it's a godsend when you get a little bit more time to make a bill even better. We are looking to pass the fourth pillar of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus mission to rid systematic racism here in the state of Illinois. We're looking to pass that bill, HB 158 and HB 159 in March when we go back to Springfield. As you know, COVID is keeping us on Zoom, and nevertheless, is an opportunity to talk about all the work that we do in Springfield. With that being said, as we ran out of time, it was stated earlier, as the past chair of the House, Illinois Legislative Black Caucus, and now we have the talented young representative or chairman, Cam Buckner, we had the task to bring forth the first African-American Black speaker. And that took a lot of time to do. So we couldn't get everything done with the work that we're trying to do here in Illinois with the Black Caucus. So I wanted to say we got a lot done. We have a little bit more to do, but we need time to do just that. The four pillars that we put forth, indeed, it was a collective effort by all of the 32 members, now 34 members of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus. The health pillars component addresses 8 areas. 1, access to healthcare, improving access to healthcare, not only in a healthcare setting, but also in a primary setting where every individual should have a primary healthcare provider so they can receive healthcare service on a regular basis from a preventative and promotional basis, as well as a treatment basis. And unfortunately, that is not real for every Illinoisan. We also discussed and put a moratorium on the closure of hospitals in our communities. As you have seen for the past year, COVID had hit the poor Black and Brown communities the hardest. And this is where, unfortunately, we have lack of resources. We have infrastructure that doesn't exist anymore. And now we want to do with the healthcare pillar, along with the other pillars, to invest in the communities where we can make sure that every individuals have access to healthcare, and closing our hospitals don't do that. Keeping our hospitals open, making sure that we have access to healthcare by providing these services in a healthcare setting, such as a hospital, is a must. We also are looking at reforming managed care organization, and that is basically the health insurance for the most vulnerable populations here in our state, which is the Medicaid eligible persons. That's what it is. And unfortunately, not every individual is eligible for Medicaid has been able to use their healthcare insurance card wherever they lived. That must be reformed. There's signs within our communities where they say we accept some managed care cards, not all. That has to be turned around. We also want to make sure we're reforming all the services that are available in the hospital setting, from specialty services, OB, radiology. All of these services that are basic to anyone's healthcare must be accessible to in every hospital in our city and in our state. We also have introduced what we title, and it's not a new term, we're just kind of bringing it back with a different nomenclature, community health workers, and who are certified to make sure that we are providing wraparound services, support services to every individual who needs access to healthcare. And we're excited about bringing that new industry back to the forefront of our communities. We also talked about implicit bias, where we are having a sensitivity training for all persons who are providing healthcare to individuals. Unfortunately, we have such diverse communities that we need to train everyone how to be sensitive to the differences that exist in our communities, and so that we will have better health outcomes. We're going to be addressing maternal and infant mortality and morbidity. Unfortunately, the statistics for maternal and infant mortality is going in the wrong direction. Women in 2020 and 2021 are not surviving delivery. Children are not making it to their first birthday. In America, when we're spending trillions of dollars on healthcare, this is devastating. This is a tragedy. We must turn this around. We're also going to be dealing with something that many of us have in our very own family, mental health and substance abuse. We must make sure we have treatment and access to care in those areas. We are doing this with an eye on investment, an eye on equity, an eye on making sure our infrastructures are rebuilt. If you don't have your health, you don't have much else. There's no way in America, there's no way in Illinois, there's no way in the city of Chicago that your life expectancy is determined by your zip code. It must be turned around. And we are excited to make a better bill this March to make sure that everyone has access to healthcare to improve their quality of life. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rep. Lilly, for everything that you're speaking of on healthcare access. One thing that jumps out is, where are we as it relates to COVID-19, not only testing, but vaccination, since we now have 2 vaccines with a 3rd one coming online fairly soon. Where are we at in Chicago, especially in Black Chicago, on these particular issues and increasing the number of spaces for this?
Well, I'm loving the young people. I am really excited with our new leadership at the top of our our country, with President Biden and Vice President Harris, where we are bringing more resources, or we are obtaining more vaccine for all of our country, which will be a benefit here in Illinois. So what we're doing is trying to make sure that through our counties, through our cities, and through our states, that we are providing these vaccinations to the health departments, to the hospitals, to our health partners, to make sure all persons will receive the vaccine. As you all have heard, Class A and Class B are in front of us now. We have made sure that we have these, I would call partners, to administer the vaccine in all areas in our communities. Where we're falling short and we are challenged is the amount of vaccine that's available. We also have a challenge where we have the African-American community, numbers are not trending in the right direction, or in the direction we are under-vaccinated. So we want to make sure that we are getting our community partners, our community organizers, to work with those health providers who are providing the vaccine, getting the outreach involved, where you're educating, you are providing the service, and you are assisting them to get the vaccination. So what we want to do is work together to make sure that each and every one of us knows where the vaccination is, and if you need any assistance, to make sure they know who to call to get that assistance.
All right, thank you for that. Again, I know we've been having some challenges and struggles, especially amongst our community, people wanting to take the vaccine And as I talked with you earlier today, people actually getting access to the vaccine. So whatever we can do, not only at a federal level, but also at the state level, to really make those vaccines available, make the slots available, and again, encourage our community to take the vaccine, I think would go miles for many of our individuals in the city. My final point, we talk about the determinants, and I think as you pull these four pillars together, we talk about the socioeconomics, but again, as you've always said, is we don't have health, we don't have anything. So as part of the four pillars on the social determinants, what is it that this bill would do to help elevate the life expectancy and health of members of our community?
One of the things that we're excited about, and again, Senator Hunter has been in this field just as long as I, if not longer, where we know prevention, medicine, and health promotion makes the difference. We have not been connecting and integrating healthcare from a primary to a, I would call, hospitalization model where we are continuum of care, where we are making sure that they work together. We have not been doing that. This bill does that. It makes sure that we are overseeing that the most vulnerable populations in our state has access to healthcare by improving the managed care insurance plan, but it also integrates the healthcare model where we are bringing primary healthcare, what we call preventative medicine, to what we call treatment modalities, making sure that they're working together, making sure that they are being accountable to have better health outcomes in our state. It is unfortunate that our health outcomes, meaning Illinois, is 42 out of 50 states in health outcomes. But yet we're spending trillions of dollars, billions of dollars in healthcare. This particular pillar brings all of those all of those providers together to create an integration of healthcare that provides access and provides outcomes to make sure people have quality of life.
All right, thank you very much. Again, that health pillar is extremely important, just as important as the other three. But as you say, if we don't have our health, what else can we do? All right. I'm going to turn you back over to my co-moderator, Ms. Lakeisha, who will take us further in the program.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Representative Lilly for that. That response. That was awesome. So I would like to give Dr. Inya an opportunity. We are running short of time, but that's okay. We want to make sure that we get all of the content that we need to get in tonight. But with respect of time, I want to give Dr. Inya an opportunity to respond to the last two pillars that we've heard about and let us know what she feels from a community perspective.
Sure, thank you so much. And also thank you to Senator Peters and Representative Lilly for those last critical pillars where there's just a lot happening on the community side. And just speaking to the economic equity pillar, there are a couple of things. I know Senator Peters referenced the payday loan, the part of the legislation carried forward by Senator Collins, which is absolutely huge. We know that when folks are in hardships, there are always bad actors, if you will, that seek to take advantage of that. And so addressing that in the legislation is absolutely critical. There were just three other points that I wanted to lift up that are important, that are bubbling up from the community side. One is looking at the disparity in lending and the importance of community development financial institutions. These are the institutions that lend specifically to Black communities, to communities that are low and moderate, low mod income communities, and they step in when traditional banks refuse to lend in those areas. So we know that redlining is still very much here and present. Some of our largest traditional banks have been woefully abysmal in their lending in our communities. And this is where CDFIs step in. And so having legislation that actually supports CDFIs so that they can expand their lending is critical, especially when you think about small businesses, entrepreneurs, the things that will make our communities vibrant. We have to have access to capital. So that is a huge provision in the legislation that will be helpful to the community. The other component is looking at the Black farmers. And this is, Illinois as the state, right? So outside of Chicago, there's a whole ecosystem out there of Black farmers. And we know nationally, Black farmers have gotten the short end of the stick for generations. There is the history is there about the transfer of land from Black farmers to white farmers, about the lack of access to capital, the refusal to lend to Black farmers. And that has diminished the population of Black farmers across the country, and certainly in the state of Illinois. And so having this legislation also look at the disparity that Black farmers have faced in this day and age, that's very important. And I can't overstate that. This is a key part of the economy, especially once you start getting to downstate in Illinois. I do want to lift up the cannabis equity because it's an issue that's been discussed in communities across the city and really across the state. There were some, I guess, hitches, if you will, in the rollout of this cannabis legislation. And it's really affecting people. There were a lot of high hopes placed on this emerging sector, opportunities to take advantage of that sector. We know that it's experienced about $1 billion in sales in 2020 alone, which is just the first year. And so there are opportunities for that sector to create wealth and getting access to that wealth, particularly for communities that have been harmed by the legislation around marijuana and sentencing. And so there has to be work done to make sure that there are on-ramps into that sector, and not just for dispensaries, but for ownership, for supply chain, for distribution, from top to bottom, there have to be on-ramps and the ability to actually generate wealth from that, as was touted when this legislation first began to move. So that's something that certainly has to be lifted up. And the final point that I wanted to just bring up is really just thinking about equity as a whole and the wealth gap that exists, and the legislation that really addresses the wealth gap, because again, our economic circumstances really drive so many other aspects, so many of the other pillars as well. And so legislation that is bold and moving in that direction is what we need at this time. And I think the current legislation has so much of what's necessary. To Representative Lilly, I mean, she's covered so many of the pillars that are crucial around healthcare and healthcare access. One of the things that came up was obviously with COVID and the disparity and how it's affecting our communities versus other communities, and making sure that we have access to the testing sites, the mass testing sites, access to the vaccine. We know that hasn't been the case, and also educating the public about the vaccine and how they can get access to it is critical. This notion of implicit bias is huge. I mean, many of us heard the story of a doctor, a Black woman who was actually a doctor in a hospital who was not getting the care that she should get because of the biases of the staff. This is very real. It actually feeds into the infant mortality rate, the maternal health, where we have women dying in childbirth. It's all, these things are interconnected. And so measures that actually address implicit bias, particularly in the medical field, is exactly what we need right now. And then the hospital closures have been big. I mean, there were marches and just rallies around Mercy Hospital in Bronzeville. I can recall a couple of years ago was Jackson Park Hospital on the South Side. The closure of these centers it does close down access to healthcare for communities. And these are communities that are often overlooked. And so having measures in place that show how these providers will be supported, that shows how these communities will not have sort of a hole in terms of access to medical care. That's what a lot of folks those are the conversations that are happening at the community level. But again, just grateful that, Representative Lilly, Senator Collins, Senator Peters, Representative Harper, people who really decided that this time, we're going to try to do as much as we can. And I think the community, we often, I myself, I'm always, I can be a big critic, but I believe also that we should support where support is necessary. And we should make sure that we're working in alignment with our elected officials, because no one can do this on their own. And so that's the kind of partnership that I envision moving forward, and that I know that our communities envision moving forward.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Inya. We've had a robust discussion tonight. We want to save a little time for question and answers. And so what I'm going to do now is just move right into it. So what I need to ask of each of you, if there's a question that you can answer that is coming from our special guest tonight, please keep it as brief as possible, as we want to make sure that we're respecting the time of folks who are coming behind us.
Well, looking in the Q&A, a lot of questions around healthcare, lack of access seems to be the theme of what we're seeing here. One talks about the lack of trauma centers on our south side, as far going from the city limits as far south as Kankakee, and we talked about access at Mercy Hospital. What is it that the legislature and us as citizens can do to help create more trauma centers and access points for healthcare for our brethren in the city of Chicago, going south in the burbs all the way down to Kankakee County?
You know, it is important that we hear this biblically. If you don't have a vision for your community, you will perish. And what happens is our communities who have been so under-resourced and we have no infrastructure, we often think we lack vision. But when you go back to healthcare, it's a right. And if all of the citizens in the communities where they're poor and they're under-resourced, you have the vision to have healthcare in your own community, you will. And you have to come together and work with your elects to make sure that you are creating the vision collectively where you can gain access in your community. The reason why you have the health disparities and the difference in life expectancy, because the most vulnerable populations in our communities have to travel 20 to 30 miles to gain access, and they are not surviving that trip. So you must continue to have the vision that you would want your specialty services. You'll want your mental health. You'll want your hospitalization. You'll want your primary healthcare providers who understand your culture, who understand your perspective on your health and treat you accordingly. You will want that close to home or in your community. You have to demand it. You can't think someone else is going to give you something when they don't live in your area, because it's been demonstrated decade after decade that they're not going to do it. In Illinois, ridding our community of systematic racism is what's going to start with the input of all of our citizens having a vision that they have the right to access to healthcare. And all of our elects on this particular platform are supportive of that and have often said over and over again, we want to provide you healthcare and access to healthcare. So we are moving in the right direction. Again, I'm going to say together, we will make sure people have access.
Thank you, Representative. And the final question as we get to our time here is, and I'm going to direct this one to Chairman Buckner, how are we going to get the governor to sign the bills that you all have passed? Because we can have all of this great conversation, but until those things are signed into law or vetoed, what is the strategy there on getting this brought across the finish line?
Yeah, thank you for that, Chairman Urban. So what we've done as the caucus is we've asked the advocates and the allies who are external stakeholders to mobilize around these issues, to mobilize around these pillars and these pieces of legislation that are now sitting on the governor's desk. We know that the governor has 60 days to sign the bills that passed, and that 60 days started, I think, last Friday when the bills finally arrived to his desk. I think a lot of us feel very strongly about the fact that I'm very confident and optimistic about the fact that these are going to get signed. But I want to remind everybody not to do our touchdown dance before we score the touchdown, right? We need to remain vigilant and make sure that the governor knows how important this is to our communities. The members of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus, we represent about 20% of the population of Illinois in our districts, right? And those communities have spoken with one very clear voice that the work that we were able to accomplish in Springfield is important for the future, not just of these communities, but of these states, of the state. So once again, I've said it a million times and I'll continue to say it. We implore Governor Pritzker to sign the bills as they were passed, and to not only do that, but to help us with the actual execution of these bills, because that's going to be a heavy lift for us as well. So, please continue to spread the word on social media. Please continue to lift up the organizations and the people and the agencies and the departments who are, continuing to do the work and to, wave the flag to let the governor know how important this is to all of us.
All right, thank you, Chairman Buckner, for that. Looks like we're right on schedule. So we just want to thank all of our panelists for joining us on this evening. State Representative Cam Buckner, State Representative Justin Slaughter, State Representative Camille Lilly, State Senator Robert Peters. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for the work that you all are doing in Springfield to help better the conditions of African Americans throughout the state of Illinois, primarily on the south and west sides of the great city of Chicago. I'll turn you back over to my co-moderator, Ms. Lakeisha Buckner-Smith, who will take us further in the program. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Alderman, you have been a wonderful co-moderator this evening. I would also like to thank all of our special panelists. The 101st General Assembly proved to be a most impactful and historical assembly. We wish you all the best as you continue to govern. And we also want you to feel safe and comfortable, especially with the members of NFBPA, to let us know what we can do to help you out in the future. Thank you so much to Dr. Inya, who took her time today to be here after traveling. So what I would like to do now is I want to bring back my committee co-chair, Mr. Derek Brownlee. Thank you.
Thank you, Lakeisha, all our panelists. As you can tell, these are very important topics. We've generated a lot of questions this evening, and we tried to get to them to the best of our ability. This is not the last policy forum that we're going to have in 2021. There will certainly be more. And right now, we have a guest that I would like to introduce, who's been a strong advocate in many of these areas that we have spoke about this evening. And I'd like to introduce, it's my honor, my privilege to introduce Mayor Lori Lightfoot.
All right, thank you, Derek, for that kind introduction, and good evening, everyone. Let me begin by giving a huge thank you to the panelists, co-moderators, and distinguished speakers for tonight's engaging discussion. Obviously, these are incredibly important issues to our community, and I sincerely appreciate the passion with which each speaker articulated, I think, a set of values which we can all agree upon and rally around. Particularly when it comes to the work of equity and inclusion, that journey very much continues and has to be at the forefront of all the work that we're doing at every level of government. The past 11 months has shown a harsh light on where we are and really been a measuring stick for us or on our path to equity and inclusion in our city, our state, and our region. And it's work that's needed to create an environment where Black people and people of color are able to live safe, healthy, and fulfilled lives free from the burdens of systemic racism and injustice. But thanks to the courageous, I think, and historic work of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus and its agenda for reforms, we are that much closer to creating that environment where members of our community can live healthy, vibrant, fulfilled lives and really realize their God-given talents without the yoke of racism and systemic disadvantages that have held too many of us back for far too long. The work of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus, built on the 4 pillars of police and criminal justice reform, education reform, healthcare and human services reform, and expansion of economic opportunity. This agenda seeks to fundamentally restructure our government and make it work for all of our residents, no matter their circumstances. It has generated important legislation, such as the Criminal Justice Reform Bill, which will ensure police accountability and transparency, and importantly, eliminate cash bail so that county jails are no longer the equivalent of debtor's prison, because people who are poor and impoverished and who bump up against the criminal justice system don't have the resources to be able to get out of jail. These are truly important and historic reforms, and I join the members of the caucus in encouraging the governor to sign the bill that's been presented before him. With that in mind, I also want to give a special shout out to the individuals who have driven these incredible reform efforts, and many of whom are on this call. Illinois Senator and Chair of the Senate Black Caucus, Robert Peters. Illinois Representative and Champion of Healthcare Reform, Camille Lilly. Illinois Representative and Sponsor of the Economic Equity Package, Sonia Harper. Illinois Representative and Chair of the Illinois Black Caucus, House Black Caucus, Cam Buckner. An Illinois representative and sponsor of the Police and Criminal Justice Reform Bill, Justin Slaughter. And of course, I want to give us a shout out to leader Kimberly Lightford for her work on education reform. Folks, you know this, but this was not easy work. There are many doubters, many critics, many cynics that you encountered along this journey. But I admire the determination that each of you mustered to rally your own selves, but also your colleagues in this historic march toward a better Illinois for Black and Brown residents. There's no understating how important the work is that you have done. I am very proud of each and every one of you, and will continue to work hand in hand with you to be a partner in this work. So thanks again. The journey continues. We know that this COVID-19 has really compelled us, and rightfully so, to face the wrongs of the past and do everything that we can to make sure that in our own way, we are bringing truth and justice and equality and opportunity to our communities that have been left behind for far too long. This is a work that we are doing here in the city of Chicago with my partners in City Council, and notably Alderman Jason Irvin, who's the chairman of the Black Caucus, and pushes us every single day to make sure that we are remembering those folks who've been left behind. But once again, thank you once and all, and I appreciate the opportunity to address this body. Thank you and good night, and I hope you all have a safe journey home if you're traveling, or if you haven't traveled, that you're staying warm. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Lori Lightfoot. We appreciate you so much for joining us today. And the NFBPA looks forward to working with your administration as we move forward here. Thank you so much for joining us. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ellen Roselle Turner. I am the corporate advisor to the NFBPA. I'm so thrilled to see so many friends that I've worked with over the past, and all the panelists who are so kind to join us today. It is our mission to, to support the careers of young and experienced people as they want to become public administrators. This evening, I want to just take a few minutes to thank all of our sponsors. I'm so proud to say that all of our sponsors are members of our minority-owned business community here in Chicago. I know that all of you support making sure that there is more inclusion for minority-owned firms, and they wanted to let you know and the folks at NFBPA know that they support our mission. Our presenting sponsor tonight is Unison Consulting. They're one of the leading airport consulting firms here in Chicago. They've been around for 30 years, and they help to improve the airport operations and profitabilities of airports. My company, the William Everett Group, we're a management and information technology firm, also a community engagement consulting firm with over 100 consultants and a proud sponsor of NFBPA. Our other partners are AdSysTech. They're a company that's really committed to the health and human services of the city of Chicago. They run the city's enterprise case management services for the city. CLK Engineers, a proud African-American female-owned construction and engineer firm run by Mae Westside, who's been doing a lot of great work in the community. I know many of you know her. Clarity Partners, is a management and information technology consulting firm with over 17 years. My partners, David and Rod, I helped start that firm. They've been working very hard in public sector. And finally, SDI Presence. They've had over 20 years of business. They're an IT consultancy and a managed services provider. They have a strong commitment to working with people in Black and Brown communities and offering them job opportunities. So once again, thank you all for joining. Thank you to our sponsors. I'm going to turn it over to our co-chair, Lynetta Haynes Turner, to close us out tonight. Thank you, Mayor Lightfoot.
Good evening. Thank you all. During a month of celebration, I will say that we celebrate all year the history in its making for Black history on behalf of all of our residents, the city of Chicago and across the county. We have had a wonderful evening, and I am going to turn it back over to our fearless leader and president of the Chicago chapter, Wasu Fashina.
Thank you, Lynetta. Thank you to Mayor Lori Lightfoot and Lieutenant Governor Stratton, President Preclinkle, the panelists, all elected officials, the Public Policy Committee, co-chaired by Lynetta Haynes Turner and Derek Brownlee. And big thanks to our outstanding moderators, Alderman Jason Ivan and Lakeisha Buckner. Wonderful, awesome job tonight. Thank you very much. And also to all the attendees, thank you for taking time out to make a difference. And for those of you that are not yet members, please visit our website, nfbpa-chicago.org, to register to be a member. And we are an advocate for African Americans in Illinois to advocate for advancement for all members. And great job. This is an awesome webinar. And this is very, very informative. I appreciate everyone, and have a great night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It was an honor.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.